Guthie's body started changing shortly after the guards bundled it onto a stretcher and carried it away, but as it was hidden beneath a sheet they didn't notice. There were strange sounds coming from it, popping and crackling sounds which they just took for the sounds of strain in the stretcher or the scuffling of their boots in the passageway. They took it to one of the labs and slid it onto the table, the sheet still on top of it. The three dissectors had followed them at a distance, whispering, holding on to their icons. They filed into the room as the guards left. "We should contact Field," the first of them said. "He'll want to know." One of the others nodded. "I'll contact him," he said, and activated the room's comlink. A strange wet sound came from under the sheet, followed by a snap like a bone breaking. The sheet fluttered. "What's that?" asked one. "Just the body settling," claimed another. "It didn't sound that way to me," said the first. "Hello, Field," said the third into the comlink. Field's tired face appeared on the holovid. "Hideki," he said. "Why are you calling me so late? What's wrong?" Another crack came from the sheet, even louder at this time. The shape underneath it had changed noticeably. "What was that?" asked Field. "Just a minute," said Hideki. "That's more than a body settling," said one of the others. "You're right," said the third. Slowly they moved forward. One of them reached out, tugged the sheet off, let it fall to the floor. What lay beneath hardly looked human anymore. The head was still there, but was not now embedded in a certain of flesh, some deformation of what had once been the shoulders. It was an animate, moving slightly, what was left of its chest heaving up and down with rapid movements. The legs had atrophied and the arms had lengthened. The body had flattened and ribs and skin seemed to have spread out to create a wing-like structure between the wrist and what was left of the ankle, like the body of an manta ray. It was an unhealthy, morbid color. The eyes were sunken in and had a strange gleam to them. "Professor Field, are you seeing this?" said Hideki. "What is it?" said Field. "Oh my God," said one of the other two. There was another cracking noise and the body changed further. What was left of the face receding, becoming lost except for the eyes and the mouth, which was now little more than a hole. It split open at the end, dissolving there into a massive mass of tentacles or antennas, now almost insectoid. The hands and feet shiveled, and hooks of bone sprouted in their place. It made a shrieking sound and began to struggle. Field shouted at them to run. The alarm started to sound. Again, Professor Hideki Ishimura fled, his only thought being to get as far away as quickly as possible. The other two researchers were paralyzed with fear. "Run," Field kept yelling at them, "run," but they didn't move. The creature flipped itself over. It sat there draped over the edge of the table, wheezing slightly, body bobbing up and down. One of the scientists gave a little cry and rushed for the door. The creature leaped, wrapping itself around his shoulders and face, pressing itself wetly against his face. He was screaming, and then the scream was suddenly stifled through the vid feed. Field watched as a strange proboscis suddenly sprouted from it with a tearing sound and stabbed through the researcher's eye and deep into his skull. It pulsed, pumping something in. The other slid into the corner and, moaning, clenched his eyes shut. "Run!" Field screamed again, but he didn't pay any attention. The first researcher had collapsed in a heap, the creature retracting its proboscis and slowly moving off him. A minute later, maybe even just seconds later, he started to change, his body beginning to shake. As Field watched, his skin changed to a deep lavender, almost purple. There was a wet tearing sound and blades of bone sprouted from his shoulders, his upper arms suddenly fading into his chest, his forearms and flexing fingers now seeming to sprout from the stomach wall. His hair fell away, his eyes growing hollow, his ears oozing down his face to join with his neck. Slowly it stood and stumbled toward the lab door. The last scientist was still crouched in the corner, whimpering slightly. The creature that had been gouty, clumsy on the floor now dragged itself awkwardly toward him and then leaped. Field cut the feed so as not to have to listen to the screams. He was dreaming. He was walking Chapter 57. He was dreaming. He was walking down an empty beach holding Ada's hand. "Michael," she asked. "Yes," he said. "Do you love me?" He didn't know how to answer, so he loved Ada. He was sure of that, but he didn't understand how she had changed, how they had moved apart. "I need you to do something for me," she said. "What?" he said. "I want to have a baby," she said. "Are you serious?" he asked. She nodded. "That's what I need," she said. "It'll bring us closer together." And then in the dream there began a far away, insistent sound. At first he hardly noticed it, but it grew louder and louder. Ada was still speaking, almost as if she didn't hear it, but he could no longer hear what she was saying. And then both she and the beach around them began to be eaten away by darkness, slowly coming unraveled, and he woke up. The sound was still going. Someone had triggered the alarm again. He got out of bed, got quickly dressed, and went out into the hall. It was deserted. In the room behind him he heard the comlink go alive. "Altman," it said. "Altman, this is Field. Are you there?" He went back, switched the visual on. "I'm here," he said. "Something's gone wrong," Field said. His face was bone white. "I saw it, but can't hardly believe what I saw. It's horrible, absolutely horrible. Get to safety, Altman, as quickly as you can." "Calm down," Field said. "Altman, tell me what you're talking about." "It sprouted swords," said Field. "Just had them sprout out of its back like." Somewhere in the background came a scream. Field whirled around and Altman saw he was holding a gun. The vid clicked off. Down the hall he heard screams. He poked his head out, saw a researcher running toward him. "What's wrong?" Altman asked. "Wait a minute, stop." But the man kept running. "They're everywhere," he called. Back over his shoulder, "You shoot them and they still come." still keep coming at you. And then he was around the corner and gone. I'm still asleep, Altman thought. He closed his eyes and shook his head and then opened his eyes again. No, it was still as it had been, more screams and now even the sound of gunfire. He rushed back into the room and looked around for a weapon. Nothing there. He went out again and down the hall in the direction the man had run, walking very quickly. Rounding a corner, he saw the corridor barricaded by a laboratory table. Turned on its side, he headed for it, and shots rang out, thunking into the wall beside his face. Don't shoot, he cried, raising his hands above his head. It's me, Altman. A chorus of shouts and the firing stopped. Someone from behind the table waved to him, and he moved to the table and pulled himself over it. Down among them, Altman said, Showalter, I'm glad they didn't get you. Get me, said Altman. What's going on? I don't exactly know, said Showalter, his eyes darting nervously from side to side. I've only seen one of them, but I wish I hadn't. It was monstrous. It had bone sides instead of arms and legs, and it scuttled like a spider. Its head just hung there, swinging, staring down at the floor, but it seemed to see us anyway. I don't know who it used to be, but you could tell from the remnants of clothing that it used to be someone, that it used to be human. It sure as hell isn't human now. Something's gone horribly wrong. I gathered that, said Altman. He looked around. One of the other men was someone he vaguely recognized. White, he thought. His name was the third he didn't know. Here, said Showalter, and handed him a gun. Got this off a guard who had his head torn off. Don't know that it'll help much. When you shoot them, they don't seem to die. They just keep coming. Altman took the weapon. How many people left? He asked. Showalter shrugged. How do I know? The four of us counting you, he said. Probably a few guards. There's a few others running around. Field visited me not long ago, so he's still alive, said Altman. It must have started down here. Maybe it hasn't made it to the top part of the facility yet, to the part above water. Maybe not, said Showalter. Vidfield, said Altman, tell me to get up there and seal the lock. Wait for us on the other side. We'll fight our way up, and once we're there, he can let us through. Showalter passed the order along to one of the other two men with him, someone called Peter Furt, who took out his hollow pod and got to work. From the far end of the hall came an eerie bellow, and then something shuffled around the corner. It stood roughly as tall as a man, but the arms it had looked like the arms of a child. They protruded from its stomach. From its shoulders had sprouted two jointed sides of bone, like the wings of a featherless bird. Its skin was mottled and seeping, disgusting to look at, and it smelled faintly of rotten meat. It was humanoid, but Altman wouldn't have guessed it had once been human if the tattered uniform was still clinging to its torso. Holy shit, whispered Altman. Keep trying to contact Field Furt, said Showalter, keeping his voice low. We'll hold it off. Oh, and if you can not to send too many bullets into the walls of the passage. Last thing we want is to be flooded out. White, Altman saw, was holding his gun so tight that his knuckles were white. The thing shuffled slowly in their direction and then stopped dead. It made a grunting sound and then, with a cry, rushed at them. "Fire!" screamed Showalter. All three of them fired at once. The shot slowed it a little but didn't seem to permanently harm it. It just kept coming. Altman aimed carefully for the head and fired 3 times quickly, at least some blood as they went in, but the creature continued forward unfazed. And then it was on them, looming over the barrier. They crouched down and kept firing, trying to keep it at a distance, but with through the hail of bullets and plucked up White. The man screamed and tried to run. The creature's sights were gouging into White's back, which had already grown bloody. It pulled him close like a lover and leaned in to bite his neck. It was terrible to watch White flopping like a fish out of water, screaming in a way Altman had heard only once before, when a rabbit had been shot in the head but lived long enough to realize it was desperately hurt. The creature was making a grotesque mumbling sound, drooling as well as biting and shaking its head so bits of flesh and gore spattered about. Altman's first impulse was to run. The only reason he didn't was because of a fleeting, selfish thought. If I don't kill it, he thought, I'll be next. He moved as close as he could and put the gun's barrel up against the creature's neck and rattled off 4 shots. It was enough at point-blank range to tear the thing's head mostly off, to get its teeth away from White's neck. But even without the head, the body kept moving. "Don't these things ever die?" shouted Altman. Showalter just grunted. He was imitating what Altman had done, holding the pistol at the joint of the scythe. He pulled the trigger and fired, and blasted tore it off. "That's it," said Altman. Maim it." He brought his gun low and shot 3 times until the thing's leg collapsed and it tilted to one side and went down, taking White with it. Altman vaulted the barrier and was on top of it. He fired and stomped on its remaining limbs, kept stomping until it was in enough pieces that he didn't think it could do any damage. Even then, he wasn't sure it was dead. He was only sure that it was incapacitated enough that it couldn't hurt him. He stepped back, stunned. His shoes and legs were slick with blood. Blood spattered on his chest and arms too. White, he saw, was still alive, but in shock, his back a bloody mass. Altman knelt down beside him and slapped his face, tried to get him to pay attention. The man's eyes flicked slightly and then clouded over. He was dead. "Is he all right?" asked Showalter. Altman opened his mouth and gave him artificially respiration for a moment, trying to breathe him back to life, tasting the dead man's blood on his lips. Showalter touched his shoulder. "Leave him," he said. He looked up and shook his head. He was just turning back toward the mouth when he heard a crack, saw White's torso convulse. He pushed away from it and scrambled back. The body seemed to be going through a fit, shaking and contorting, and then it began to change. Altman watched horrified, trying to keep his panic under control. "What the hell is going on?" he said. "He's changing," said Showalter. "He's one of them now." "Let's get the fuck out of here," said Altman. "I'm afraid there's one more thing we have to do," said Showalter. "What's that?" asked Altman. "We need to take steps to make sure he doesn't come after us." Altman nodded, his lips grim. "You mean," he said, "we're going to have to dismember him?" The two of them were standing together, breathing heavily, staring down at blood and gore on the floor, the pieces of the creature and of the partially transformed White. "I'll never be the same," thought Altman, and he could tell by the way Showalter dodged his gaze that he felt similarly. He'd been having nightmares before, but he had material for an entirely new set of them now. "I got through to Field," said Peter Furt. "He says as far as he can determine, the creatures are still all in the lower levels. He'll try to get into the airlock and shut it, and then wait for us to contact him. If we're going to make it, we'll need something other than guns," said Altman. "Bullets don't do enough. They barely even slow the things down." "What do you have in mind?" asked Showalter. "We raid the labs and janitorial closets as we go," said Altman. "See what we can find. Anything that'll cut off a limb or get a part way there." They found in the first lab they came to a handheld plasma cutter which, by unscrewing the guard, could be made into a close combat weapon. Showalter calibrated a laser pistol, taken off a dead guard, using the tools of the next lab to give it a wider beam, something with a little slicing power. Peter Furt dug up a laser scalpel, modified it to cut through an object as thick as a wrist. Probably won't stop them," said Altman. "First thing I'm worried about is cutting through their sights," said Furt. "If I can get that far, I'll be lucky." "All right," said Altman. "What do we have to lose? Let's go."